Ida for ruining my sister's proposal because she stole my graduation spotlight? Hi Reddit. I'm not usually one to post personal stories online, but after everything that's happened over the past few weeks, I feel like I need an outlet, a place to share what's been sitting heavily on my chest. I'm still trying to make sense of it all, so bear with me. I'm a 22-year-old woman who just reached a major milestone in my life. I graduated from college last month. To some, it might sound like a routine achievement, something that countless people do every year, but for me and my family, it was monumental. I'm the first person in my entire family to walk across that stage, clutching a diploma that symbolizes years of perseverance, sleepless nights, and relentless determination. For us, it wasn't just a graduation, it was a symbol of breaking generational cycles. It was proof that hard work could open doors we once thought were forever locked. My parents were over the moon with pride. Growing up, we didn't have much, but they always made sure I had what I needed to pursue my education. My dad used to work double shifts at the factory just to make ends meet, while my mom would take on extra cleaning jobs to ensure that I could afford textbooks or pay for the odd school trip. They believed in me when I struggled to believe in myself, and seeing me graduate was their dream as much as it was mine. So, when the big day finally came, my parents pulled out all the stops. They organized a huge party to celebrate, one that brought together our entire extended family, friends from the neighborhood, and even some of my professors who had become mentors to me over the years. The living room was decked out with balloons and banners that read "Congratulations" in big, bold letters. Tables were piled high with food that my mom had spent hours preparing, from homemade casseroles to her signature apple pie. The backyard was transformed into a festive space with twinkling fairy lights and a makeshift dance floor. Everything was perfect. At least, it was supposed to be. But, of course, there's always a twist in every story, isn't there? Enter my older sister, Sophie. Now, let me tell you a bit about Sophie. She's 28 years old, 6 years older than me, and has always been the golden child in the family. You know the type, the one who lights up every room she walks into, who has that magnetic charm that makes people gravitate toward her. Sophie has always been effortlessly beautiful. She's got the kind of hair that falls perfectly into place without trying, the kind of smile that could melt even the coldest of hearts. While I've spent my life with my nose buried in books, grinding through endless assignments and exams, Sophie has floated through life like it's some grand adventure. And I'll admit, for the longest time, I admired her. I wanted to be like her. I wanted to have that same ease, that same glow. But as I got older, I realized that we were just different. While I found fulfillment in academics and setting long-term goals, Sophie thrived on spontaneity. She was the life of every party, the center of attention at every family gathering, and while that was fine most of the time, it wasn't easy growing up in her shadow. It wasn't that she was mean or intentionally hurtful. Sophie isn't a villain. But she has a way of stealing the spotlight, even when she doesn't realize she's doing it. It's just who she is. And because she's so charming, people don't seem to mind. They love her. They cheer for her. They always have. I remember one Christmas when I was around 10 years old. I had spent weeks saving up my allowance to buy my parents a little gift, a pair of matching mugs that said "World's Best Mom" and "World's Best Dad." I was so excited to see their reaction, imagining their faces lighting up as they opened the neatly wrapped package. But before I even had the chance to give them my gift, Sophie burst into the room with a huge announcement. She'd been cast as the lead in the school play. Instantly, everyone's attention shifted to her, and my little mug sat unnoticed on the coffee table. That's how it always went. I was the quiet achiever, and Sophie was the star. As we grew older, our paths diverged even further. While I focused on my studies, Sophie hopped from one relationship to the next, always chasing that fairy tale romance. She dated musicians, artists, businessmen, anyone who seemed exciting in the moment. And while her love life became the subject of family gossip, I was the one constantly grinding in the background, working toward a future that didn't make for flashy dinner conversation. Still, I didn't begrudge her for living her life the way she wanted. We all make choices. Hers were just different from mine. I told myself that when my moment came, when I finally graduated, it would be my time to shine. For once, I'd get to be the center of attention. I'd get to feel that warm, glowing pride from my family without having to share the spotlight. But, of course, things rarely go as planned. The day of the party, everything started off wonderfully. My parents gave a heartfelt speech about how proud they were of me, and I could see the tears welling up in my mom's eyes as she spoke about the sacrifices they'd made to support my education. My dad, who isn't usually one for public displays of emotion, wrapped me in a bear hug and whispered, "You've made us so proud, kiddo." For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. This was my moment. Then Sophie arrived. She walked in with her boyfriend, Ethan, in tow. Ethan's a decent guy, a little quiet, a little reserved, but he's been a steady presence in Sophie's life for the past year. I greeted them both warmly, genuinely happy to see them. After all, this was a celebration, and I wasn't going to let any lingering insecurities ruin the day. But something about Sophie's demeanor seemed different. She was practically glowing with excitement, her eyes darting around the room like she was waiting for something to happen. At first, I thought she was just thrilled to be at the party, but as the day wore on, I noticed how she kept whispering to Ethan, giggling like a schoolgirl with a secret. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just being overly sensitive. Maybe this was one of those moments where I needed to remind myself that not everything is about me. Still, there was this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, a little voice whispering that something was off. And then it happened. During the toast, just as my dad was raising his glass to honor my graduation, Ethan suddenly stood up, cleared his throat, and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. The room fell silent, all eyes on him as he turned to Sophie with a smile that could light up the entire neighborhood. "Sophie," he began, dropping to one knee, "you've made me the happiest man alive. Will you marry me?" I blinked, stunned, as the room erupted into cheers and applause. Just like that, my moment was gone. At first, I didn't fully register what was happening. The moment Ethan got down on one knee, it felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Time slowed to a crawl, and the cheerful noise of clinking glasses, laughter, and celebratory chatter faded into a dull hum in the background. Was this really happening? Here? Now? I watched as Sophie gasped dramatically, her hands flying to her face in an exaggerated show of surprise as if she hadn't known this was coming. The way she glanced around the room, taking in everyone's reaction, made me wonder if the whole thing had been rehearsed. Ethan's voice, steady and heartfelt, echoed through the living room, but his words blurred in my mind. All I could focus on was that tiny velvet box he held in his hand, the sparkling ring inside catching the light with a cruel glint. The cheers started slowly, building in waves as the realization spread through the crowd. My cousins clapped wildly, my aunts squealed with delight, and even my parents looked genuinely thrilled by the scene unfolding before them. I stood frozen, my champagne flute trembling in my hand. My mind raced. This was supposed to be my day. This was my party. I worked for this moment. Yet, somehow, Sophie had managed to make it all about her. Again. The applause grew louder. People swarmed around Sophie and Ethan, offering their congratulations and asking to see the ring. Sophie, ever the center of attention, was basking in the glow of it all, her face alight with joy. She posed with the ring on her finger, flashing that radiant smile of hers as cameras clicked and phones recorded the moment for social media. I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest, the beat growing louder with each cheer, each excited gasp from the crowd. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience, like watching a car crash in slow motion but being powerless to stop it. And the worst part? No one seemed to notice how hurt I was. No one noticed me standing there, alone, in the corner of the room that was supposed to be my celebration space. Instead, they gathered around Sophie. Of course, they did. They always gathered around Sophie. I glanced toward my mom, hoping for some sign that she saw what was happening, that she understood how inappropriate this was. But to my dismay, she was smiling warmly at Sophie, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue as if this engagement was the most beautiful thing she'd ever witnessed. Even my dad, who had just been in the middle of giving a heartfelt toast about my hard work and perseverance, now stood with Ethan, clapping him on the back and laughing like they were old friends. He hadn't even finished his speech before the engagement took over. I felt invisible, reduced to a side character in my own story. Still, I tried to hold it together. I tried to remind myself that maybe Sophie and Ethan hadn't planned it this way, that it was just bad timing, an unfortunate coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. The way Sophie had been acting all day, her barely contained excitement, the way Ethan kept glancing at her with a knowing smile, this wasn't spontaneous. This was deliberate. She knew exactly what she was doing. As the party continued, I felt more and more isolated. People I hadn't seen in years came up to me not to congratulate me on my graduation, but to gush about Sophie's engagement. "Isn't this wonderful?" Aunt Linda exclaimed, grabbing my arm. "Oh, your sister looks so happy. And Ethan is such a catch." "Have you seen the ring?" one of my cousins asked eagerly. "It's stunning." I forced a smile, nodding politely, but inside, my emotions churned like a storm. Every comment, every congratulatory hug, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. No one even mentioned my graduation. The party that was supposed to celebrate my hard work and achievements had become an engagement party, Sophie's engagement party. At one point, I slipped into the kitchen, desperate for a moment of peace. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge tightly as I fought to keep my composure. The tears were threatening to spill over, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not now. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Sophie standing there, her face glowing with happiness. The ring on her finger caught the light, and for a moment, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head in that casual, almost dismissive way she always did. I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat. "Yeah, I'm fine." She frowned slightly, clearly unconvinced. "You don't look fine." "Well, maybe that's because this was supposed to be my day," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "This party was for me. To celebrate my graduation. Not your engagement." Sophie blinked, taken aback. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling with barely contained frustration. "Do you even realize what you did? You hijacked my party. You made it all about you. Again." Her expression hardened. "It wasn't like that. Ethan proposed because he loves me. It's not like we planned to ruin your day." "But you did ruin it," I shot back. "Whether you planned it or not, you stole my moment." Sophie rolled her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. "Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. It was just a family party. It's not like this was some huge public event. It was my celebration," I insisted. "It was important to me. And you couldn't even let me have that." There was a tense silence between us. I could see the defensiveness in her posture, the way she squared her shoulders like she was preparing for a fight. But there was something else there, too, a flicker of guilt in her eyes. "Sophie, you've always been the center of attention," I said, my voice softening slightly. "And that's fine. I've accepted that. But couldn't you have let me have one day? Just one?" She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did." Another silence stretched between us, heavier this time. Sophie looked down at the ring on her finger, her expression conflicted. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, that she might acknowledge what she'd done and offer some kind of reconciliation. But instead, she sighed, shaking her head. Look, I get that you're upset, but it's not fair to make this all about you. Ethan proposed because he loves me. This is our moment now. Our moment. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Without another word, Sophie turned and walked back into the living room, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say but couldn't. It was in that moment that I realized something important. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I achieved, I would always be standing in Sophie's shadow. And she would never even notice. I stayed quiet for the rest of the party. But not because I wasn't angry. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause a scene. I stayed quiet because I knew if I opened my mouth, the words that would come out would be too raw, too cutting. And this was supposed to be a celebration, my celebration, even if it didn't feel like it anymore. I watched from the sidelines as Sophie continued to bask in the glow of her engagement. She twirled around the room, showing off her ring to anyone who hadn't seen it yet. People took pictures with her and Ethan, their smiles wide, their eyes sparkling with excitement. And I stood there, invisible. By the time the party started winding down, my emotions were barely contained. I could feel the tension in my jaw, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The ache in my chest had grown into something unbearable, and I knew I couldn't hold it in any longer. When most of the guests had left, and the hum of conversation had finally quieted, I saw my chance. Sophie was standing by the dessert table, laughing softly at something Ethan whispered in her ear. They looked so happy, so carefree, like they hadn't just hijacked one of the biggest milestones of my life. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and walked over. Sophie, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned to face me, her smile fading slightly as she caught the look on my face. Hey, can we talk? Alone. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, who gave her a small nod before stepping away. She turned back to me, folding her arms across her chest. What's up? I motioned toward the back patio. She hesitated for a moment, then followed me outside. The air was cooler now, the night sky dotted with stars. It should have been peaceful, but my mind was anything but. I didn't waste any time. What you did today was selfish, I said, my voice low but firm. It was disrespectful. Sophie blinked, clearly caught off guard. Excuse me. You heard me? I continued, the words tumbling out faster now, fueled by the hurt and anger I'd been holding back all day. You couldn't let me have one day. One day to celebrate something I worked my ass off for. Instead, you made it all about you. You and Ethan. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, come on. You're seriously upset about that? Yes, I snapped. I am. Sophie sighed, rolling her eyes. It wasn't a big deal. The party was just a family thing. It's not like you had reporters here or something. Everyone will forget about it in a few days. That's not the point, I said, my voice rising. It was my moment. My achievement. And you took that away from me. She scoffed. You're being dramatic. Dramatic. I echoed, my voice trembling with frustration. Sophie, you could have picked any other day to get engaged. You've been dating Ethan for a year. You couldn't wait a few more days? Or do it on a day that's actually about you. Sophie shifted uncomfortably, her arms dropping to her sides. I didn't know he was going to propose today, she said, though her tone lacked conviction. I shook my head. You knew something was up. You've been acting weird all day. Giddy. Like you were waiting for something to happen. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. And even if you didn't know, I continued, the moment he got down on one knee, you could have stopped it. You could have said, not today. This is my sister's party. But you didn't. You went along with it. You wanted the attention. Her expression hardened. That's not fair. Isn't it? I shot back. You've always been the center of attention, Sophie. Always. Every family gathering, every holiday, every milestone, it's always about you. And I've been fine with that. I've stayed in the background. I've let you have your moments, because that's who you are. But this was my moment. And you couldn't even let me have that. There was a long silence. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she would apologize. That she would see things from my perspective and acknowledge how hurtful her actions had been. But instead, she sighed again, shaking her head. You're blowing this out of proportion, she said. It wasn't like I planned to steal your thunder. It just happened. And people are happy for me. Is that such a crime? I never said people shouldn't be happy for you, I said quietly. I'm happy for you, too. But this wasn't the right time or place. And you know it. She looked away, her jaw tightening. Well, I can't undo it. No, you can't, I agreed. But you can at least admit that what you did was wrong. Sophie didn't respond. She just stood there, staring out into the darkness, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed. Look, I'm sorry you feel that way. I clenched my fists, fighting back a retort. Sorry you feel that way. The most dismissive, half-hearted apology someone could give. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It wasn't taking responsibility. It was brushing off my feelings as if they were irrelevant. Typical Sophie. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, I muttered, more to myself than to her. What's that supposed to mean? I turned to face her fully. It means that you've always been selfish, Sophie. You've always put yourself first. And no one ever calls you out on it because you're the golden child. The charming one. The favorite. That's not true, she said, her voice rising defensively. Isn't it? I challenged. Ask Mom and Dad. Ask them who they've spent more time bragging about over the years. Ask them who gets more attention, more praise, more love. It's always been you. Sophie crossed her arms again, her expression guarded. Maybe that's because you're always so quiet. You keep to yourself. How are people supposed to notice you if you don't put yourself out there? I laughed bitterly. Putting myself out there? I've been busting my ass for the past 4 years in college. I worked for everything I've achieved. I don't need to flash a ring or charm my way into the spotlight to get validation. She flinched at that, but I didn't care. I was done holding back. This party was supposed to be about recognizing my hard work, I said. And you couldn't even give me that. There was another long silence. Sophie shifted from foot to foot, looking uncomfortable. Finally, she sighed and shook her head. I'm not going to apologize for being happy, she said. I stared at her, my chest tightening with a mixture of sadness and frustration. I'm not asking you to apologize for being happy, Sophie. I'm asking you to acknowledge that your happiness came at my expense. That you could have chosen a better time, a better place, to celebrate your engagement. But you didn't. And that's on you. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked back inside, leaving me standing alone on the patio, my heart aching with everything left unsaid. As the door closed behind her, I let out a shaky breath, my shoulders sagging with exhaustion. The party was over. The damage was done. And I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same between us. I couldn't let it go. The knot of resentment and hurt in my chest was too heavy to carry alone. After Sophie's dismissive reaction, I needed to talk to someone, anyone who might understand what I was feeling. So, I vented. First to a few close friends and then to some of our family members who had been at the party. But to my surprise and growing frustration, most of them didn't see things from my perspective. You should be happy for her, they said. It's her moment now. Let it go. Don't make it about you. Their words stung. The way they dismissed my feelings made it seem like my graduation, something I had worked so hard for, was trivial in comparison to Sophie's engagement. They acted as if getting proposed to was the pinnacle of achievement, while my years of sacrifice and hard work barely registered. She didn't mean any harm, one of my aunts told me over the phone. It just happened. You can't control when love finds you. She could have controlled where it happened, I snapped back, but it didn't seem to matter. The overwhelming response was clear. I was being bitter and selfish. I was overreacting. I was making Sophie's engagement about myself. And the more people told me that, the more isolated I felt. It was like they couldn't or wouldn't see how hurt I was. Only a few people really understood where I was coming from. My best friend, Emma, was furious on my behalf. She knew what she was doing, Emma said, pacing around my apartment as I sat slumped on the couch. Come on, a proposal in the middle of your party? That wasn't an accident. She wanted the attention. I don't know, I mumbled. Maybe I am overreacting. No, you're not, Emma insisted. You're allowed to feel hurt. This was supposed to be your day, and she stole that from you. If anything, Sophie should be apologizing. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But after the backlash I'd received from our family, I couldn't help but doubt myself. The worst part? Sophie found out that I had been venting. I don't know who told her, maybe one of our cousins, maybe one of our family friends, but a few days later, I got a text from her. It wasn't long or emotional. It was blunt and to the point, like most of Sophie's messages. Really? You're bad-mouthing me to the whole family? Grow up. That was it? No, hey, can we talk? No, I'm sorry if I hurt you. Just pure defensiveness. I stared at my phone, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her exactly how I felt, how her actions had hurt me more deeply than she realized. But another part of me was just tired, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past week. Instead of replying right away, I set my phone down and tried to focus on anything else. But the text haunted me. Later that night, I finally gave in and responded. I'm not bad-mouthing you. I'm telling people how I feel. There's a difference. Her reply came almost instantly. You're making me out to be some villain. I didn't do anything wrong. You're the one who's making this a big deal. And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? Sophie didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She didn't see the problem because, to her, my graduation wasn't that important. Not as important as her engagement. The next family gathering was awkward, to say the least. It was a casual Sunday dinner at my parents' house, nothing fancy, just the usual get-together we had every couple of weeks. But the tension was palpable from the moment I walked in. Sophie barely acknowledged me. She spent most of the evening glued to Ethan's side, laughing and chatting with our cousins as if nothing had happened. My parents, bless them, were clearly walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace. They avoided any mention of the party, the proposal, or the fallout that had followed. At one point, my mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. Sweetheart, she began gently, can we talk? I nodded, bracing myself for another round of let it go and be happy for your sister. I know you're upset, she said softly. And I understand why. But, you and Sophie need to find a way to move past this. Your sisters. Family is important. I sighed, leaning against the counter. Mom, do you even realize how much that hurt me? That day was supposed to be about celebrating my hard work, and it turned into Sophie's engagement party. I felt invisible. Mom's eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt. I know, she said quietly. I do. And I'm sorry we didn't handle it better. But, you're both adults now. You need to talk to each other and work this out. I bit my lip, holding back the wave of frustration building inside me. Why was it always my responsibility to fix things? Why did I have to be the one to reach out, to make peace, when Sophie was the one who had caused the problem in the first place? Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave, Sophie approached me. Hey, she said, her tone cautious. Can we talk? I nodded, though I wasn't sure what to expect. We stepped outside onto the porch, the cool night air wrapping around us like a blanket. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. I'm sorry, Sophie said finally, her voice quiet. I didn't mean to hurt you. I blinked, surprised. It wasn't the most heartfelt apology, but it was something. I didn't think, she continued. Ethan was so excited, and it all happened so fast. I wasn't trying to steal your spotlight. I guess I just got caught up in the moment. I took a deep breath, trying to process her words. It did hurt me, Sophie. A lot. I felt like everything I worked for didn't matter. Like I was invisible. She nodded slowly. I get that now. And I'm sorry. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could move past this. But then she added, but you have to understand this is a big deal for me too. Getting engaged is a huge moment in my life. And just like that, the flicker of hope dimmed. I'm not saying it isn't, I replied carefully. I'm happy for you. I really am. But couldn't you have waited? Picked a different day? That's all I'm saying. Sophie shrugged. It just happened. I sighed, realizing that this was as good as it was going to get. Sophie would never fully understand how much that day had meant to me, how much her actions had hurt me. And maybe that was okay. Maybe I needed to let go of the idea that she ever would. In the end, we agreed to move forward. To try to be better. But I knew things wouldn't be the same between us. And as I drove home that night, I couldn't help but wonder. Was I the asshole for wanting to be seen? For wanting to be celebrated, even just for one day? Or was I just tired of living in my sister's shadow?